Okay, lovely to see you all. Now that I have a gallery, I can actually see many more people. So yes, let's begin. So really a warm welcome on this chilly Friday to seminar 19 of our series, Grappling with Complexity. One of the reasons for this seminar is to try and make the complexity discourse as a way of negotiating contemporary issues more prominent in our neck of the woods. So if you look back over the series so far, you can do this on YouTube, but we've had a very diverse mix of international and local experts and grapplers. And this morning, I'd like to introduce to you Sharon Rudman and Jacqui Lück. I think that they would probably identify as grapplers in complexity, but they are both language experts from Nelson Mandela's University's Department of Linguistics and Applied Linguistics. And they're going to open up for us this extremely complex topic of language. So welcome both of you. I'm very looking forward to hearing you speak. And I'd like to just hand over now to Sharon to introduce. Thanks, Sharon.
Thanks, Andrea. And thanks, Jacqui. I can see the slides, so I assume everyone else can. Is that,
yes.
Is that right? Okay. Okay, so hi to all of you. I'm just going to start off by giving a little bit of background of what Jacqui and I are involved in. Jacqui and I have worked alongside one another in the Department of Linguistics and Applied Linguistics for the past 20 years. And we're also both trainers on the SIT TESOL, Teaching English to Speakers of Other Languages course, which is run at NMU every January. For the past 12 years, we've also co-taught on the English Language Studies module and collaborated on a research project which stemmed from our experiences with a first-year English Language Studies course. Jacqui now holds the position of Deputy Dean of the Faculty of Arts at NMU, but she's remained active in teaching this module. The LES first-year project has become something of a passion for both of us, and we continue to probe the potential of the course, both in terms of the space it provides for the students because of the content, and also the opportunity to understand some of the dynamics at play in our society as mirrored by the students in the course, and the potential shifts for shifts and relationship in our fragmented society. So complexity theory is new to both of us, and we've only just begun to learn about it and to consider how it could contribute to our understanding and development of the LES project. Sorry, LES is the module code for English Language Studies. Although we still have much to learn, we already sense that there's much to gain from the principles and application of complex systems theory. And this seminar will talk you through a little of our journey with this theory. Jacqui will start off by explaining some of the implications of approaching language from a complex systems perspective. And then I will pick up on with an application of some of those principles to discourse. And then Jacqui will close off. So over to Jacqui now.
Thank you, Sharon. So I'll just attempt to get the slides to move. I don't know why I grapple with this. It moved earlier, but now seems to have just stuck. Anyway, while it's stuck at this point, I'm just going to start you off and just say I'd like to start with a general discussion on language. So forgive me if it gets a bit technical, but I'm going to try and keep it just so that you can understand it if you're not in the field of linguistics. I want to start with historic notions in applied language studies, especially with reference to the field of psycholinguistics and language acquisition. And then I want to move us to how complexity theory has disrupted these notions and gives us possibilities for an additional thinking about language. So, apologies. You know, we are in the field of applied linguistics, and historically, if you Google applied linguistics and you look for a definition of it, besides giving you the subfields, it will offer you solution. It will say that applied linguistics offers solutions to language-related real-life problems. And therein lies a problem itself, because if you are positioning a field as offering solutions to problems, then that becomes the narrative. And if I can reference our dean, Prof. Maseko, who talks about when we remain in the realm of talking about problems, you know, it can paralyze us. When she said the other day about if we complain all the time, you know, and not look to the richness that's embedded within language and the resources, and look at it from that point of view. So it ignores complexities and richness, that definition. It also operates from a monolingual bias that we have one language and that we acquire others. So it erases how multilinguals learn language. So that's how applied linguistics has been historically framed. This is the discipline Sharon and I in, and a lot of the colleagues in the room. Sharon and I did our masters in psycholinguistics, which is a subfield of applied linguistics, which is how the brain processes, acquires language. And I want to talk just a little bit about that, and then talk about how complexity theory has disrupted those historical theorizations, and then take you into what more global South scholars are saying as well, and how they can be in conversation with complexity theory. And then Sharon will talk to you about our module, and how what a complexity lens reveals about what happens in that module, the kind of engagements we have. So psycholinguistics sees language acquisition as these bounded processes, that you have a first language acquisition process and a second language acquisition process that happens, you know, cognitively, and you have these psycholinguistic mechanisms. So language acquisition is this linear process. A seminal theory is that of interlanguage, and or has been that of interlanguage. Larry Selinka, who is Professor Emeritus, I can't remember now which university, but in 1972, he theorized about this notion of interlanguage. So if you look at the circles, these circles here, language A would be the language that your first language, your mother tongue, your native language, that you acquire first, according to, you know, our historic theories. You then want to acquire a second language, the target language. And Larry Selinka theorized that only 5% of people reach this target language, that the rest are in this, what he calls an interlanguage structure that they've activated. Now, this interlanguage structure is neither a native language nor it's a target language structure. And it's characterized, and it's where most second language learners find themselves. And it's characterized by what they call, what he coined as fossilization. And so bear with me, because we're going to get to complexity. I just want to tell you about how complexity spoke back to this theory. And so fossilization, I got that fish there because it makes me think about, you know, just the terminology. Being in linguistics, whenever you look at words aren't neutral, you know, they position people, they carry meaning. And so fossilization means that a second language learner, I have died, maybe, decomposed, been covered, been discovered, but I'm never alive. So when you fossilize, it means that these structures, these mistakes keep revealing themselves, even if the teacher explains to me, no, this is the rule. Even if I hear other native speakers produce this rule, I carry on making this mistake. And so Selinka theorized that it's due to transferring from your mother tongue, it's due to how you're learning in the classroom, it's due to what you are hearing other people say, the mistakes other learners make. Anyway, more than 40 years later, interlanguage still has a very, very strong effect on how education has been enacted in our country globally, because what we are focused on is on what is the best method to deal with fossilization. Why do learners make mistakes when they speak English or when they speak Xhosa, when they speak Afrikaans, French? Should we teach them grammar only, what we call form focus? Should we teach them communicative, where they work with text and they make meaning? So a lot of studies and soul searching goes into what is the best form to deal with these deviations of, you know, that learners are displaying when they try to express meaning in another language or in multi-languages. So the process of language acquisition in terms of this theory is linear. You start with the target language, you're hoping to move to the native language, but you're stuck in this interlanguage. So it's very simplistic elements at play. Many people have spoken back to this theory. Montreal 2014 said in a book called The Interlanguage 40 Years Later, said fossilization, transfer, and simplification should not be seen. Those mistakes, those deviations from standard languages shouldn't be seen as deviations, but a natural phenomenon of multilingualism. And possibly it's a driver of language change. So now let me come to complexity theory. I'm just going to just go to these two slides, and then I'll talk about how complexity theory speaks back to psycholinguistics. So complexity theory problematizes the way in which living systems have been portrayed and studied as static. So taking that is becoming and labeling it as being, and so imposing a framework which then excludes essential aspects and results in limited knowledge and understanding. Cameron and Larson Freeman in 2008. Now, Larson Freeman was the one who excited applied linguistics back, I think, in 1997. In the early 2000s, she brought the complexity theory lens, Diane Larson Freeman, to applied linguistics. And furthermore, if we use a complexity lens, then language is understood as a complex system. It's non-linear. It's not that linear that Selinka et al. Talks of. It's got components and processes which interact in unpredictable ways. It's open, it's influenced by its environment, it's constantly changing. And of course, we know users construct and reconstruct it. So as a complex system, it organizes itself, and these emergent patterns are both stable and unstable. You know, they can be, in linguistic terms, fragile or resilient. They can stay, or they can, you know, disappear or show themselves up all the time. So the makeup of this system changes as exposure to the environment, internal interactions bring new variables into play. So we see that happening a lot with new urban vernaculars that are, you know, arising, how language has been changing, how in education we say to the learners, no, you must not use net speak, or you must not use SMS speak and emojis, and, you know, we don't want these new variables to distort what we think is a pure form of language. So language as open and dynamic, just to say, we've drawn on Larson Freeman a lot just in the theorization, because she first started putting this lens on language. So when we look at languages in terms of complexity theory, then it's an open system. It's dynamic, as I've said. It's continually transformed by use. It is the way it is because of the way it's been used. And any use of it changes it. So the stable language structures, or the attractors in terms of complexity theory, are due to maybe they're being versatile, or maybe there's a particular dialect that has more power than other dialects. We know that happens in linguistic communities. You have languages that have high prestige and others that have lower prestige due to historic, socio-historic colonization, you know, consequences. So some language structures, also just internal language structures, might be have more power and they might stay. And we also see in response how language changes in response to environment. We see now with COVID-19 that language that has been driving language change. language is then responding to our environment. The most poignant example at the moment is the pandemic and the manner in which language is responding to the new demands made of communication, new attempts to convey new practices, routines, new debates, you know, anti-vax, vaccine hesitant, new lexicon entered our, new words entered our lexicon, like COVID-19, flattening the curve, mask to mask. Existing phrases have been put to new use, bubble, social distancing. And phrases that were backgrounded have now been foregrounded, like vaccinate, quarantine. You can Zoom, that's what we're doing at the moment. The British linguist has said that Zoom might even be around even post the pandemic, you know, because how it has defined us and how we interact. And so, if I can just move on to the next slide, carrying on talking about complexity theory in language. Cameron and Lawson Freeman in 2008 talks about a language how a language still maintains an identity as the same language. Somehow it still does that. And they use the analogy of the human body, which even though its cells are constantly being created and dying, the person from all appearances, you know, still perseveres. So it maintains its identity as the same language, but there are variables that are changing. So to all appearances, it still looks the same. And Claire Crunch, she drew on Lawson Freeman's work, and she said that there's no start in terms of language acquisition or learning a language and acquiring it, and there's no end, unlike the interlanguage linear theory. All the time we are adding new language, even though this language, you know, is maintaining its identity as the same language, it's being upset by new knowledge, and it reconfigures this new knowledge, and that there's multiple routes possible, and we may mediate all these components in different ways. I suppose just from personal experience, we can think how we mediate new knowledge that comes when we learn a new language, and that there are individual differences in how we acquire language, because there's so many complex factors at play when I learn a language. And so complexity theory considers the whole ecology of language learning, that as a learner, you are in interaction with others, your past, your present self, ideologies and discourses, which is something Sharon's going to hone in on, which is what we focus on in our module, and we want to then apply a complexity lens to this. So complex systems, we know they're emergent, and that the rules are emerging from interactions and they don't pre-exist. And that's quite profound for how we view language, you know, that the rules are not there, pre-existing and static, and that we have to, you know, but this is how we have been taught to view language, as the static, you know, entity. What we learn in language is the interaction of a multitude of factors. So important is that complexity theory linking the language and culture within a socio-historical approach. Language cannot be devoid of context. This slide just talks to the pedagogic dilemmas that we have in learning language, in teaching language, using language, so that there is the very tool we use to make meaning limits meaning. So that is something that's very complex to think about as well. Something that is very important. Lawson Freeman says that complexity theory can free individuals. If we use that as a lens to think about language, and then if we think about all the elements that play and how new knowledge emerges in complex systems, that then frees individuals from the stigma of being a defective language learner. And it frees us from feeling humiliated, ashamed, embarrassed when we, you know, use language in fluid ways, or the languages in our linguistic repertoires. So a language system is open, it's unpredictable, and meaning making emerges. Bourdieu speaks of a memory pad as we acquire language. It accompanies us beyond our speech community into encounters with new languages, new others. this, I don't agree with Claire Crunch here. She says, as language learners, and she's writing about complexity theory, but she talks about, but I think she's got still a monolingual bias. I'm not sure. You know, I don't know. I haven't read enough around her work, but she talks about how language learners feel about languages that they're acquiring beyond, you know, if one language. She says, the languages are never mine. It belongs to someone. And while I'm open, I'm worried about losing myself. Yes, that, I suppose, maybe there are people who feel that way, but I feel that for multilinguals, you know, that might not apply. Because I think that still can be calling on ideologies of language that's bounded, and that takes me into language and agency. And you must just tell me how I'm doing, Sharon, because I can't see the time. Just language and agency is important. Our talk is entitled, you know, language and its agents. So what I really like about what Lawson Freeman is saying in terms of complexity theory, she says that she still talks about second language learners, and of course those boundaries are, we need to problematize first and second language learners. She says that normally when you learn a language and a second language, you construed as non-agentive, that you don't have any agency, because our linguistics theories tells us that there's an order in which you acquire grammatical structures. So no matter what happens in the classroom, even if the teacher teaches you this is what you are going to be naturally. You will first acquire, you know, whatever continuous tense, and then you will acquire plural s. This is what studies have shown. Or that unique, what Stephen Krashen talks about, comprehensible input. If the teacher is not giving you input, that's one level above what you know, you won't learn. And so you're passive. And she says that actually does not speak to the fact that we are agents. And she says, if you look at all the theories, that no one theory accounts for agency. But what Lawson Freeman likes about complexity theory is this idea of relational ecological systems lens, where a system is an integrated whole. You can't, it's irreducible to its parts, and it arises from interactions and relationships between the parts. So she basically says that agency, she says, is not power. She doesn't see agency as power, Lawson Freeman. She sees it as something to be achieved, and she says it's interpolated from the interaction of factors, internal and external, to structures, people, and develops in relation with others. What I like about what she says is that reflexivity equals agency. That as you observe whatever you are contributing to, that observation process contributes to what emerges. And so she says that, I'm not going to go into all of this in too much detail, but it's all about language. I'm going to hand over to Sharon, but it's about language agency, how it's temporally situated, and it connects your life history, your past, your present, your future goals, expectations, imaginations. And coming into the classroom where we teach language learning, it should be a porous class, not where the teacher knows everything, but where the teacher and the learner together investigate language. And that to me is like very Freudian as well. And so it kind of, what is the word, resonates. And learners and teachers must both be transformed. And then I'm just going to end with this slide. If boundaries are problematic in complex systems, then so too, for me, the boundaries and many people between first and second language conceptualizations remain problematic, because that does not account for multilinguals. We know that languages are in flux and they're changing, and Pennycook and Makoni and Makelele all have shown how languages were invented as part of a colonial nation-state project, one nation, one language, and that when colonizers imagined the colonized world and narrated it into being, they drew on ideologies of languages separate and innumerable. So counting languages was important, and separating, putting boundaries. And today, and so colonial grammars and linguistic textbooks are based on particular constructions of language. Often it was about how the language colonizers used with indigenous people, not how the indigenous people use the indigenous languages themselves. So we sit with these notions about how language is constructed in terms of boundaries. That this is English, this is French, this is Xhosa, this is isiZulu, and that simplistic view has material effects. It's what is considered standard, how we enact it in our schools. And Penny Cook and Makoni says we need to disinvent and reconstitute languages in the contemporary world, displayed in our new urban forms. And this contradicts language as hermetically sealed units. And I think that speaks very well to complexity theory. Makalele talks about Ubuntu translanguaging. One language is because another language is, there are no boundaries. So I think I've spoken a lot and I'm going to then hand over to Sharon, and forgive me, Sharon, did I take up all our time? Is it like?
No, that's perfect. Thank you so much, Jacqui. So when we, okay, Jacqui, so could you move to the next slide, please? Or Jacqui, next slide. Yeah, thank you. Okay. So when we look at language from the perspective of discourse, there are two levels to consider, the individual and then the larger community, both of which can be seen as complex systems. On both of those levels, then, we should be looking for emergent behavior or patterns which would then reveal how the system has self-organized. In a face-to-face conversation, one would note a number of emerging patterns, both stable and variable aspects. Stable as factors, or as Cameron and Larson Freeman put it, gentle attractors, would range from, for example, routinized sequences. For example, those sequences related to culture or localized routines. So the kind of thing that would be studied in conversational analysis, ranging to the sense-making stories repeatedly referred to in meaning-making within a particular socio-cultural context, which is what we are interested in when we study discourse. Any patterns that endure will endure because they work, because the system will maintain and constantly return to those patterns which work. So in this sense, sociocultural forces pre-shape the landscape on which conversation takes place, and in this way work downwards. Discourse patterns, particularly those with staying power, emerge because of social and cultural forces in the environment, and these include, of course, the history of the context. Other aspects of discourse emerge upwards, because conflict resolution and cooperation on the part of language agents can play a role in disrupting the so-called stable aspects of a discourse. So the stability of a discourse is therefore largely, Jacqui, no, you can still stay there. Yeah, thank you. So the stability of a discourse is therefore largely dependent on the coupling or the interaction between the so-called stable patterns or attractor aspects of a discourse and other environmental or contextual factors, as well as whether there are other resources available. One could therefore refer to a circular causality in the discourse system. As Rosalind Frank puts it, at the local level, the behavior of the individual language agents determine language. That is, their choices act cumulatively to determine emergent language structure, excuse me, understood as operating at the global level. At the same time, when viewed from the local level, the resulting emergent global level structure co-determines the range of behaviors of the agents. That is, it acts to constrain and to shape interactions at the local level. So in this sense, an understanding of discourse would encompass at the same time consideration of that which happens on the level of individual language agents, as well as the cumulative effect of these. So the emergent patterns in terms of the larger discourse system, which results from the combined behaviors of all the language users in that language or language group or society. So Some of the questions that one needs to ask are, which patterns are most entrenched in a particular discourse, and why? Which forces contribute to the longevity of those particular patterns? And what is the historical context of those entrenched items? What role is played by memory? Okay, next slide. Thank you, Jacqui. These aspects and others that we will mention come into play when we consider the particular situation which Jacqui and I are interested in studying. So let me give you a bit of background, because I will refer to some of the student input as I go further. To summarize very briefly, we co-teach the first years in English language studies, semester 1. And 4 to 5 weeks of the module are dedicated to a section entitled Language and Ideology. During this time, via lectures, tutorials, and tasks, we familiarize the students with the concepts of ideology and discourse, common sense assumptions, and related ideas. During this time, the students complete a task, part individual reflection and part group discussion. In the discussion section, groups of 6 or 7 students from diverse language backgrounds. So we always try to ensure that there are 3 or 4 languages represented in each discussion group. They apply the key concepts in considering the common sense assumptions made about particular language groups, which of course in South Africa basically equates to race and culture. Students then consider the commonly held beliefs about one another and the origin of those beliefs, the validity of those assumptions, and the roles which these assumptions play in their daily interactions with one another. Thereafter, they write a short reflection in which they consider how and whether these discussions have prompted them to reassess any of the initial views, which were noted in an initial reflection. For the first time also this year, we asked them to reflect on the experiences of doing the group task online, because that was a first for us and for them. When we set up the initial task a number of years ago and read the student reflections, Jacqui and I were taken aback at how many of the students claimed that this section of the module, and particularly the group discussions, proved to be a turning point in how they viewed those from different language groups, as well as the potential to form relationships with those previously perceived as other. And this has been the case every year since then. From the time we read those first reflections, we've been trying to understand or explain the dynamics of what happens in those interactions from different perspectives and using different theoretical frameworks. And this is where we are hoping to put complex systems theory to work. Okay, so that's just a little bit of background, because I am going to be referring to some of our student reflections as we go on. Every individual discourse subject can be seen as a complex system. Here, it's worth considering Lacan's description of the subject of discourse, which he describes as split or divided, meaning that the individual subject is never spoken by just one discourse, but is rather an interplay of different discourses and diverse subject positions within those discourses. He or she is never just defined by only one thing, but is rather a system operated by many internal agencies and structured in terms of various sublevels of organization. Although the subject can be seen as a system, it is a system in which the different parts never exist in complete synthesis or harmony. According to Lacan, the division of the subject is manifest in a number of ways. Firstly, the subject is operated by many agencies, and all of these entities together form a system which comprises many components and various configurations of organization of those components. The interplay of different discourses and alternate subject positions results in a discordance characterized by the split subject. The first, Lacan reminds us that the first and most momentous split within the subject is that between the conscious and the unconscious. This understanding of the subject means that one cannot, in regarding any individual, assume that they're a reflection of only one particular discourse system. Different discourses, each represented by a specific so-called knowledge package, interact within the individual and potentially contradict one another, thus causing conflict. Every subject has a different makeup of discourses and subject positions in those discourses. And this means that the configuration of conflict within every person will also be different. This process produces unique situations of opposing discourses, and as a result, they also produce original meaning effects that can result in certain social and personal consequences. So as one student very profoundly put it, who am I? Yet even as we struggle to define our unique identity, we are being defined by others. And I thought that quote really reflects a lot of what is coming or what comes out in the student excerpts that I'm going to show you and others. So next slide. Thank you. So a number of students reflect a sense of confusion as they grapple with their own perception of identity, as it then comes up against the manner in which they feel they are being constructed by others. So these are all excerpts. These three are excerpts from three different students just on this topic. And I'm just going to skim through it with you. The first one says, during this assignment, because of the different language group individuals, it was difficult, excuse me, to explain everything that I think for others to understand and vice versa. I'm not just an English-speaking female, but also a colored English-speaking female who is Afrikaans educated. With my upbringing, I started mixing the two languages and often forgot that other cultures, people from different language backgrounds, would not understand Afrikaans words. Another student says, one of my group members said I was lying when I say isiXhosa is my home language while I speak isiZulu so fluently. I was very confused and we started debating about my language group. That made me think living in another province away from home made me lost my identity. And the accent of my home language and people start to doubt me and see me as a liar that claims to be a Xhosa. And another student said, at first I thought that I had a fixed idea of my identity. I never in a million years knew that a few months of engaging and being active in this module would push me to break down barriers. This module has allowed me to ponder on my own identity, so much so that I discovered things about my own identity that I did not know existed. Next slide. Of course, another aspect to consider in terms of the subject as a complex system is the fact that each of us are housed in a biological organism, the human body. And this is also a point that Lacan makes. So discourse in conjunction with biological traits would differently situate and thus impact on different subjects. Our biological traits, for example, race, gender, health, perceived attractiveness, determine to a large extent how we are positioned in a particular discourse and how we thus relate to that discourse. Some of the students reflect on this aspect. For example, gender. A student said, I grew up being taught a man is superior than a woman. A man is the head of his house and a woman must be submissive to their husbands and take care of the house chores. These are some of the things I grew up listening to and I automatically accepted them as genuine. Through this module, my way of thinking has changed. I've started questioning my beliefs. And then just on race, I'm an Afrikaans speaking colored, and the assumptions made about my language are that we are rude, mean, and violent. Meanwhile, I'm none of these assumptions. Okay, thank you. So the subject's particular discoursal makeup determines how they process and act in interactions with others. Cameron and Larson Freeman describe an interaction between individuals as an interaction between complex systems. And they explain that each person engaged in a face-to-face conversation can be seen as a complex system of interacting subsystems of continuous ideational, emotional, and physical activity, from the cellular and neural levels up to the physical being encountered in the conversation. This individual comes to the conversation from and with his or her own ontogenetic history, and will move on from the conversation changed in some way by participating in it. In conversation, speakers soft assemble I'm quoting them, soft assemble their contribution through the adaptation of these subsystems in the moment and on the fly. What we see and hear happening in a conversation are the observable traces of interior, physical, emotional, and cognitive subsystems, continually adapting in soft assembly in the discourse environment, which includes the topic, oneself, and the other. Next slide, thank you. So although we are not able to directly observe the interactions in the first year discussion groups, the reflections written by the students give us some idea of the conversations, as well as some of the individual reactions to the encounters. And there are indications that for some, these were not easy conversations, as the two excerpts below show. The one student says it wasn't easy to talk about those topics, and some of our group members I've just taken it exactly as they wrote it, we'll become angry when we talk about what we believe about their language group. For example, one of our members from the English language group was angry by the fact that English speakers think that they are superior. They don't want to learn other group languages. And then another student wrote, how people use their language or words to describe my identity from my own language group challenged how I think about it also. Every word got the power to trigger emotions, imagination, and actions, and so did theirs. They did not choose words carefully, and that resulted to wrong usage of words to detail the identity of my own language group. Words spoken in a language you understand stays in your head, leading to your overthinking about what you've been told or the way it was said. Speaking English almost every day of our discussion made me question the quality of my own language group's identity. The more I communicated in English, the more my identity was deprived from it, and thus made me think if the identity of my own language group still had value or I was losing it. So a very honest reflection of how the student experienced these interactions. So the conversations did not guarantee comfort or safety, and yet there were many indications of the adjustments that students made as they interacted with each other in order to accommodate each other, as these excerpts reflect. One student said, it was hard for me to speak about these topics. I do not want to lie at first. I was even afraid to speak about those common sense assumptions about other languages. But then one of my group members noticed that we are nervous. He tried to comfort us by telling us to be free and talk anything we know, because this will, I suppose, help us to understand each other better. And it seemed that he noted that we are very shy about these topics. He made us to be comfortable by talking to us friendly and nice. And then after I was free, although some of the topics were very personal and complicated. Another student said, the challenge that we dealt with was when I was being myself and my group mate thought that I was being rude, and I had to accommodate her, showing that I was not fighting. It is how I am. Next slide, there's just one more here on how they adjusted to accommodated one another. I was the only person in my language group whose home language is English. It was kind of hard to express myself in the group or to become a part of the group because I could not fit in with the different kinds of home languages. My group members could see the way I felt, and there was one time that I brought the topic across that I could not understand what they were saying. They decided to negotiate their identities in order to make sure I knew what they were talking about. And for the first time ever, I finally realized that people whose home language is isiXhosa or isiZulu negotiate their identities in order to make us feel comfortable. So some interesting reflection there. And many student reflections also implied that for some, they move on from the interactions changed in some way by participating in it. That the subject of discourse as an open system has porous boundaries. And in the words of Alcorn, discourse nodules and configurations are always leaking into the subject, producing various singular effects and thus affecting subjectivity. So consequently, the subject is able to absorb aspects of external discourses and also produce in this realm. because of the existence of contradictory discourses within the subject, there's always the chance that these conflictual discourse processes within the subject could unravel the structural unity of social discourse. And if an individual unraveling is verbally expressed and shared and is rhetorically effective, others could be convinced to buy into an alternative or counter discourse, which is produced in the process of unraveling. Although an individual on their own obviously can't start an ideology, Lacan suggests that an ideological system generally originates in enunciation at the level of the individual biological subject. And so, if supported by concrete historical events and motivated by an imagined participation in social consequence, it's indeed possible that a process initiated in this way could eventually result in the establishment of a new ideological order. So in this sense, Lacan attributes great potential agency to the individual subject. Not only is there potential to effect change within individuals themselves, but also to initiate societal change on a much larger scale. And that's quite an exciting idea when we read some of the shifts that students claim to have made through the module. I'm sure you would have, I know you can read faster than I can speak, so you've probably read that one. So I'll just go on to the next one if I can, Jacqui. Thank you. Okay, so here's another student's reflection on this in this sense. Before the discussion, I had different thoughts about other groups, bad thoughts actually, that they are superior than I, too white to speak with me. But after the group discussion, I felt differently. We connected very well and were able to understand each other and be loyal to discuss what we thought of each other, which was fun and felt good. And then I've got one more slide, thank you. And then what we just took into account this year as well was that it was done online. And we just asked students to reflect on that experience. And some of them pointed out positive aspects, for example, that they could speak more easily, more freely about topics. And others noted that it was much harder to get to know one another. They didn't feel like they were really communicating and so on. So I see I've taken up a lot of time, so I'll stop here and I'll hand back to Jacqui just to finish off. Thank you.
Thank you. As you can see, Sharon and I have always lots to say about this module, and I hope that you have some kind of idea of what it is that we have done in it. So I think what complexity offers us in this module is it helps us then to look at discourse through this lens, and how students are positioning, and how others position others. It lets us have an additional lens to look at student agency and how engagements, like Sharon says, results in shifts or new knowledge. And also the complexities of learning online is something that that we've been looking at. And just want to end, because I know we've taken up all, Andrea's never going to invite us back. Basically, what we are relishing about complexity theory, and we just started exploring it, is that it then becomes part of all these entangled knowledges that we are drawing on in conversation with each other as we make sense of applied linguistics in our space and this module, what we teach. So thank you for listening, and yeah, I'll stop sharing. Thanks, Andrea.
Jacqui, and Sharon, thank you so much. That was incredibly exciting, very, very interesting. I've got 100,000 questions, and I'm sure lots of you do too. So I think I'm not going to abuse my position as kind of host, and I'm going to ask Ndlela. I think he mentioned something in the chat, maybe to just start us off. And then if you want to ask a question, just raise your hand or put on your video and yeah, make a noise of some sort, and we'll get the discussion going that way. Okay, thanks. Hi, Ndlela. Good to see you.
Sorry, I'm in studio. I just wanted to, I have a real issue with language, and I think it's maybe linked to what Glenn is also going to ask about, in terms of accent and all the rest of it. I mean, I've been caught up several times, being who I am on the telephone, saying you sound a certain way or you come from a different space, and people tend to access or try to access your sense of who you are through the way you speak, and maybe even just the language you're speaking. So my question really is, and particularly in SA, in South Africa, and I think we can extend the conversation to Europe and all the rest, because if you go to Germany, you must speak German and so forth. Why language is so intensely ties us to this this notion of identity and nation identity specifically. And I put in the question here, it's like, if you meet someone on the street anywhere and they say, like, so what language do you speak? You call yourself an African. Do you speak anything in the vernacular? And then after a few moments, it's followed up by, so why don't you speak this language? You've been in this country for so long. And my answer would be, why should I? That's the sort of thing. I mean, obviously it's a whole lot of Tower of Babel stuff, we all, that's the only analogy I can think of, language as a divisive entity rather than as something that is about getting to actually communicate with people, or to know and allow for agency and so forth. So those are my thoughts, really. I think I've articulated it in the question a little better than my rambling at the moment, but thank you.
Jacqui?
I don't know if it's a question, Vuli. Is it?
Oh yes, it is kind of a question. So, like, do you have any thoughts on perhaps why it is that our nation identity is so intensely, and I think more negatively, linked to language, to it in many respects? I'm working with diaspora and thinking about people crossing over from Zimbabwe specifically, and we now know that you can walk into a restaurant and hear people speaking Shona, and there's almost like a kind of this place has hired a lot of Zimbabweans, so it's I don't know, there's a xenophobia aspect linked to that as well. So I'm sorry, it's a Friday and I'm just rambling.
No. Well, in response to Prof. Nyoni, I think it's very complex, but it's largely, I mean, I don't know if we can say simply that it's largely due to the idea of nation state, ideologies of one language, one nation, that we are still sitting with, that's being reinforced in our schooling, in our education system. If you read, for example, Leketi Makalela's work, Leketi writes about how in the Iron Age, the Khoi lived in the kingdom of Mapum Gubwe with, people who spoke, Nguni languages, and traded with people. And so the languages were very porous, and the languages flowed into each other. And those languages, then boundaries were placed on them, and they were categorized. And we then still enact that in our schools, and we still have this idea of, that you are one language. But I mean, there are many, especially in the global South, speaking back to those constructions, but the schooling still persists. People are talking about pluriversal linguistics in decolonial theory. People are, there's talk about multilanguaging, multivocality came up the other day. Ali, we were talking about it last night, or was it just the other day? And so I think it's just our legacy that, and we see these new forms arising as well. One of my honors students last year in the module. Honors, somebody asked her what's her mother tongue, and she said, I can't answer that. And she says, I don't know what to say. I'm ashamed. I don't know what to say because I feel that all these languages. And she felt that it was a sense of shame that she was this multilingual, because that's the deficit view. We're not supposed to be multilinguals. We're supposed to be defined by one language. And yes, maybe many of us are, but I don't know. Multilingual has become more is a global norm.
Yeah.
So I think that's complex, very complex.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Sharon wants to respond as well. Sharon.
Sharon, you're muted, I think.
There
you go. That's better. Yes. No, you're muted again.
No, I was just going to say, Jacqui Jacqui said it all.
Sharon, can I ask you a question a little bit related to that? As one of the things that you said in your presentation earlier was that these attractors, the stable, the relatively stable aspects of language are stabilized because they work. And then, so that's a kind of a pragmatic approach, that things stay because they work. But on the other hand, later on, which I think is actually more accurate, is that you said that these patterns become entrenched, and you want to know why they become entrenched. And then there's a whole power discourse that kind of, and so it's a kind of a clash, maybe a clash between pragmatics and between power, and less power is pragmatic, I'm not sure, but I think it's kind of an interesting sort of dynamic there.
Yeah, well, I think that part of the reason a lot of those discoursal patterns would work is because of the configuration of power within the context that they exist. So, you know, in terms of reflecting that particular configuration, they work. And until that is disrupted, they would endure. So does that sort of answer the question?
Yeah, I guess it's because pragmatics is sometimes not ethical. It's, you know, it's the
oh, absolutely, yeah. So yes, I mean, pragmatics is how we do things with language, and what we do is determined, and how we do is determined by the sociocultural environment that we're in, where power is obviously, you know, one of the strongest variables. So yeah, I would.
Okay, thank you. I think there's a question from Michelle. Do you want to speak to it, Michelle?
Sorry, and I said I was going to look. I'm going to put my camera on and don't.
Hi, Michelle.
Hello. Hi. I'm extremely fascinated by the use of complexity theory with language, because I teach gender and identity and diversity, and so I always use intersectionality. So thank you for introducing me to the complexity side of the theory. But I'd be interested to see how a new language like Swahili has been created within a region of East Africa by using the different languages, and a language like Fanegalo or Tsotsitaal in Johannesburg, because there the power is pragmatic. It is about, and language is about power and belonging and needing to show that you belong and communicate, and it almost levels the playing field. So I was just interested in how this would play, how your understanding of complexity theory in language would play out in that case, Jacqui and Sharon. Sorry, I said I was going to look.
No, sorry, I'm glad you're not lurking.
I think if I can go first, I think it speaks exactly to these new forms. Sinfri Makoni, who is like one of our applied linguistic rock stars, as Marius would put it, he says that our focus should be on these new forms that are emerging, and that you know, not on the standard languages with these boundaries, and that that there would be these intersections between many languages, and I think that's why many of the language scholars nowadays are talking about multilingual pedagogical approach called translanguaging, because they say this is actually how languages operate, that, you know, they move fluidly, you use them, they seep into each other, and so these new forms should be celebrated, not maligned, and that they arise because of complex interactions, and then rise the richness and the knowledge sources that we should be opening ourselves up to, but that we still see them as deviant, not what's a word, that they're deviations, and we don't embrace them. But like I said, Sharon and I are still very new to complexity. So Andrea threw down the gauntlet, and so we are, but we're seeing so many synergies with what we are doing. So
Right.
So I don't know, Michelle, that was a little ramble, but I don't know if it even responded to you, what you're saying, but I just think that those holes are where we should be. Yeah.
Thank you. And also South Africa is now wanting to introduce Swahili as a language at school. So that would be interesting, because then we're importing a language that's already constructed and teaching it as if it's French or German or, not a Southern African language, but imported. Sorry.
Well, yeah. And you have to understand why they're doing it. What are the reasons? Mandarin as well, I heard. So even at our own institution, I think it might be something that we would consider, but just to as a way of enhancing linguistic repertoires, practices of people and understanding, because with language comes knowledge, and it's not only how we mediate meaning, but it's also there are also knowledge sources in it. So it would be maybe give us insight and maybe more connection with the continent. We've been accused of being seeing ourselves as not part of. So I would like to view it in that way, Michelle, maybe, yeah. But fascinating things are happening in linguistic space departments. For example, at UWC, they are encouraging, because I saw Rachel put a comment, asked a question about academic writing. Rachel, at UWC, Bassie Antier and Quinton Williams, they've embarked on letting their students write in CARPs, write in hip hop. So academic essays, they would say, "Wat is democracy?" Or is it closer? You use the varieties. And many of the students, and Sharon Dyers has also been doing studies there, many of the students have said it has helped them to understand concepts much better by, using all the languages that they have in their repertoire. So I don't know if I've kind of maybe probably diverted from what you were saying, Michelle, but yeah.
Jacqui, thank you. And we're kind of running over time, but can you believe it? I know these times fly by so fast. But there's just one quick question I want to kind of put to Sharon, which relates back to this discussion about the kind of multilingual, translanguaging, diverse mix and all of that. And that was something quite practical, which I thought was quite interesting in your actual presentation, where you read students' excerpts. And the first time you read over a mistake and corrected it. And then the second time you kind of caught yourself and thought, no, I'm going to read it as is. I thought that was the process going in your mind. And then you reflected on it at some point that you're reading grammar that's not correct, but and there was a bit of discomfort then. I'm thinking, okay, that kind of speaks to the this kind of it's a difficulty, isn't it? How much mixing makes the language incomprehensible.
Yeah, it's the English language teacher, that lives in us, Jacqui. But yeah, and in that task, in the reflections, we tell the students, grammar doesn't matter. Obviously, we want to understand what you're saying, but we want them to feel free to express themselves as freely, as easily as they can. And so that is why I take them just as they write them. So yeah, and even though I suppose people would say, a lot of students might know what you want to hear and reflecting according to that. There's so much sincerity that comes through in many of them, where they speak of the questions we ask are very they don't students are not forced to open up and be vulnerable, but many of them take the opportunity to do that, and perhaps the freedom to just express themselves as they want helps, maybe. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yes.
It's the contradictions within us, you know, that we have to like kind of unbind ourselves from that English language teacher.
and that's something that you've learned from complexity that you must do. Okay, which is interesting. Yeah. Okay. I'm really actually sorry that we have kind of we've actually run out of time. So I think, who is this? Somebody is sharing.
Biden.
Biden. Okay. All right. Okay. So I think, though, that we will have to, do you want to respond to that? We could maybe give you a minute or two.
Thank you, Leiden. It's about deconditioning yourself from colonial grammar rules.
Yes, yes. I have a suspicion that complexity would require, as Sharon said, a kind of there is a certain stability as well as a certain dynamism in language, and you actually need both. So if you, well, that's what I imagine, but this is not my, would either Jacqui or Sharon, would you like a kind of final word?
We fine. We just yeah, we're just excited about exploring it more. And seeing how, yeah, what affordances it has for us. And I saw Marcel was also saying that she was interested in, yeah, we'll take the conversation further.
Yes, yes.
Sharon and I definitely are going to take it further.
Yeah, and thank you, Andrea, for the deadline. These are they're always very useful.
Yeah.
That's
and I mean,
yeah,
but I see how it can,
yeah, very excited. I think you, sorry, Jacqui and I, we kind of, but I think taking this further would be absolutely vital. I think it's very necessary. I think you're doing wonderful work, and I think that a complexity lens seems to be a natural fit for the things you're doing. So thank you both very, very much for a very exciting seminar. As usual, it kind of just opens up a whole lot of desire to take this further. So I hope that will happen. And thank you everybody for joining us. I think we're going to have to end now, and I'm just going to sort of wave. If you want to turn on your sound as you wave and say goodbye to Jacqui and Sharon, that would be great. I want to see
Lehi Maya.
Cheers, Glenn. Cheers.
Bye, Glenn. Sorry we couldn't answer your question, Glenn.
I'm sure you have given him lots of ideas. Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Jacqui and Sharon. Thanks, Andrea.
All right. Okay.
Bye, Maya.